In this world, everyone receives special powers from the gods, and these abilities determine people's lifestyles. The anime begins with a carriage being attacked by a group of goblins, and a group of warriors appears to help protect the carriage. Meanwhile, our protagonist, a hungry boy named Fate Graphite, was on his shift guarding the castle while his stomach growled incessantly. Later, the group of warriors passes by him, discussing how they earned money and leveled up thanks to goblin hunting. Fate overhears their conversation and thinks about how he'll never be able to achieve something grand like them because he's just a useless person with an insatiable appetite due to the gluttony ability he received from the gods, which seemed to serve no purpose other than making him constantly hungry. However, Fate believes that at least he can continue working to support the Valeric family. Nearby, we see the three Valeric siblings who are holy knights responsible for the safety of the people. Due to their profession, they look down on others and mistreat them for trivial reasons. After some time, with Fate barely enduring the noise from his stomach, he's relieved that his shift is finally ending when the three siblings appear and ask if Fate did a good job in their place. When Fate responds positively, Raphael throws some coins on the ground as payment for the service. However, when Fate bends down to pick up the coins, Hada decides to have some fun by stepping on his hand. He calls Fate dirty and other cruel names while beating him for no reason, as his two brothers enjoy the situation, believing that people with abilities like Fate should be grateful because, in their opinion, they only earn money due to the pity of the Holy Knights. Fortunately, another girl named Roxy Hart, who was also part of their group, intervenes and puts an end to the abuse, stating that it's wrong for them to mistreat citizens they've sworn to protect. While the three siblings look at Roxy with disdain, she continues by saying that guarding the gate was a task meant for the Holy Knights, meaning they were passing their responsibility onto someone defenseless like Fate, even though it was their duty to ensure the city's safety. Raphael counters by saying that they also have a duty to provide employment to those in need, as if this were a valid excuse to mistreat Fate. Roxy questions the reason behind this treatment, but for the Valerics, it's merely a difference of professional opinion. Fortunately, the three siblings decide to leave Fate alone, and as they depart, Roxy rushes to help him, acting in stark contrast to the Valeric family, being kind and even assisting in cleaning his wounds. Fate thanks Roxy for her help, and she responds that it was no big deal, as they are fellow gatekeepers, and it's the attitude all Holy Knights should have. Next, Fate hands over his shift to Roxy, and she asks him not to allow such torture to happen again and to inform her if it does. However, Fate only thanks her for her concern but says he's used to it. Then he leaves Roxy at her post and goes to buy something to eat with the little money he earned. He thinks about Roxy's words, but Fate knows that even if she wants to help, it would only get her into trouble with the Valeric family. And for that reason, he believes he can't let her get involved in the situation in any way. At this moment, the restaurant owner notices that Fate has once again been mistreated by the Valerics and warns him that if he continues to endure this abuse and the brutal work at his job, he will end up like the other guy who worked for them. But the boy didn't have many options, so he simply thanks the owner for the food and leaves with his stomach still growling due to the gluttony ability, making him wish he had been born with something more valuable, not necessarily becoming a holy knight, but something more useful like a warrior, merchant, or even a craftsman. On his way back home, Fate spots some thieves who were invading the castle and rushes to inform Roxy, who was still guarding the gate. She immediately decides to leave her post to confront the thieves, leaving Fate in her place. He asks her to be careful, and she reassures him, saying she trusts his abilities. Some time passes with Fate listening to the sounds of Roxy's fight against the bandits, hoping everything will end well when suddenly the noise stops and one of the thieves appears wounded, running towards him. Fate freezes but remembers that if he flees, it will be Roxy who gets into trouble, so he faces his fear, determined not to let the thief escape. With his spear in front of him, Fate manages to defeat the bandit, and with this action, his gluttony ability is finally activated, boosting his stats. This surprises him, and when Roxy appears, worried about him, Fate can even hear her thoughts, leaving him more confused than before. However, as soon as Roxy releases his hand, he loses the ability to read her mind. She says she needs to report what happened to her superiors, and Fate suggests she not mention his help, thinking it might cause problems for her, as it was her shift. Roxy agrees not to say anything, thinking it's to avoid trouble with the Valeric family. However, she knows that she would have failed in her duty to protect the castle if it weren't for him, and as a way to thank him, she offers him a new job to work for her family, making it clear that he shouldn't worry about the Valerics, as he is the one who can decide his own future. This leaves him thoughtful. After all, it was a significant offer to leave the job with the three troublesome siblings who treated him like garbage to work for the Hart family with Roxy, who had always been kind to him. However, Fate worries about leaving his job as someone needs to guard the castle during his shift, but Roxy reminds him that it's a duty only for the Holy Knights, so he shouldn't be concerned. With no other reason to stay in his current job, Fate accepts Roxy's offer. Later, at his home, he analyzes the changes in his stats, noticing how they have increased. He realizes he has two new abilities, Identify and Telepathy, understanding that when he could read Roxy's thoughts before, it was the effect of telepathy. Despite not fully understanding what was happening, Fate thinks that with these stats, he might be able to defeat some monsters. So the next day, he goes to buy a useful weapon. Unfortunately, the 2 silver coins he had managed to save in 5 years in the capital can only buy him a weapon considered trash. With no other option, he examines each sword with his Identify ability, but they all have 0 durability and strength, until he notices a dirty black sword that catches his attention. He identifies it and learns that it's called Greed. For some reason, he can hear the sword's thoughts, and it tells him they have much in common, and that he won't regret keeping it. So Fate, intrigued by the talking sword, decides to buy it. Meanwhile, at the Vleric's house, Memel discusses the rumors he's heard about Roxy wanting to hire Fate to work for her family, considering it an affront to them. Raphael, on the other hand, says they don't need Fate because they can easily replace him. Memel persists, saying that Roxy questioned how they handled their duties as holy knights, but Raphael responds that it's not worth complicating things since the Hearts and the Vlerics are part of the 5 families supporting the king. Then he mentions he's leaving for the military district. His sister asks what he's studying there, and he answers that it's a study on how to become immortal, a response that Memel doesn't take seriously at all. Meanwhile, Fate decides to go to a secluded place to test his new talking sword when he's attacked by a goblin. He manages to activate his abilities in time to defend himself, eliminating the goblin and further increasing his stats. However, he soon realizes that goblins always travel in groups and finds himself surrounded by them. He begins to fight them one by one, blocking their attacks and taking them down individually. After spending the entire night battling the creatures and leveling up, he finally eliminates them all, exhausted from the prolonged fight. Fate then checks his stats and is shocked to see that he has acquired more new abilities, and to his delight, his stomach has finally stopped growling. He comments that he thought it wasn't possible to gain new abilities, and the sword explains that he managed this thanks to his gluttony. The sword tells him that people typically increase their stats in battles by gaining experience and leveling up, but gluttony allows him to steal abilities and stats from his opponents. The drawback is that he can't gain experience, which explains why he's still at level 1. He asks how the sword knows all this, and it replies that they are similar. Seeing some warriors approaching, the sword warns that gluttony is one of the abilities that defy divine laws and could cause problems if someone discovers this power. Upon hearing this, Fate decides to work alone, only with his talking sword, which reminds him that he needs money and suggests collecting goblin ears as trophies. After some work to collect the ears of the 38 goblins he defeated, Fate manages to obtain 3 silver coins and 80 bronze coins, celebrating the fact that he finally has enough money to buy some meat. However, the sword soon begins to demand maintenance, insisting that it should be treated like a jewel, which explains its name, Greed. At that moment, Fate accidentally bumps into a troublesome guy coming out of an alley with a little girl. When he touches her, Fate can hear the girl pleading for help. Clearly something is wrong, but when he uses Identify on the man, he realizes that the man can conceal his abilities, making them invisible. Despite not knowing what the man is capable of, Fate follows him to a hidden place where he has imprisoned and is torturing the girl without showing any mercy. The sword tries to convince Fate to back off, but Fate can't stand to see someone suffering and not do anything to help. He's determined to rescue the little girl. Nearby, in an orphanage, a nun tells the children that the goddess Laplace created the world, and when she departed, she bestowed a blessing upon each person, special powers they call abilities. She asks the children to thank Laplace for her blessings before their meal, and they all do so, except for one little boy. The nun asks if he's feeling unwell, and the boy says that Laplace isn't fair since she gave incredible abilities to some people, like the holy knights and warriors, while others like him receive weak abilities, explaining that's why he was abandoned. The nun then tells them that a long time ago, when Laplace still protected the world, before she gave abilities to people, there were no statuses or even monsters, with everyone living equally. The boy cries, saying he wished he had been born in that time, and at that moment, another nun appears, saying she couldn't find Sahara, a girl from the orphanage who had gone missing. She explains that she couldn't find her in the vicinity, so she'll search in the city. The lady looks at Sahara's empty chair, growing worried about what might have happened, unaware that the poor girl had been kidnapped by a man who was currently mistreating her. He intended to hand Sahara over to a knight, and she cried in fear of what would happen. Fortunately, Fate was there and seized a brief moment when the man left the girl alone to take action. However, as Fate was about to release Sahara from her chains, the man returned. He found Fate's attempt to play the hero quite foolish. Fate then prepared to fight, positioning himself in front of the girl to protect her. But since he didn't know what to do, his sword, Greed, suggested that the man clearly thought he was stronger than Fate, so he should play along to take advantage of that confidence. He decided to follow his sword's advice and ran away pretending to be afraid. This amused the man, thinking that if he killed Fate in front of the girl, she would become completely obedient to him. Then, after a while, Fate stopped running and knocked down some crates in the area, leaping over them to attack the man. Realizing that Fate was indeed going to fight to protect the girl, the man activated his weapon, making it glow, and Greed recognized it as a sharp blade. Greed instructed Fate to attack quickly and strike the man through his sword. The boy immediately did so, shattering the sharp blade and striking the man with a single blow. With the man defeated, Fate asked who the Holy Knight was who had ordered him to kidnap the child. However, as the man refused to speak, Fate forced him by placing his sword on the man's wound. This immediately made the man confess that he was hired by Hada of Lyric. After being rescued, Sahara began to feel hungry, and Fate heard her stomach growling. So the two of them finally introduced themselves, and Fate took her to eat something. He bought 2 meat skewers for them, and Sahara explained that it was the first time she had ever eaten meat in her life. Fate decided to give her the other skewer as well. At night, he returned the girl to the orphanage, where she immediately ran into the arms of the nun, who was overjoyed to see that she was safe. Both of them thanked Fate, leaving him surprised since no one had ever thanked him before. He explained to Sahara that he had a weak ability like her, and said that no matter the difficulties, if she could find humor in things, happiness would come one day. Sahara asked if this applied to her as well, and he said yes. Fate remembered that his father had told him that phrase when he was a child, and he had the same reaction as Sahara. But despite not understanding it at the time, thanks to that phrase, he had reached where he was, and he wished the same for Sahara. Then he said goodbye to the girl and continued on his way. Later, Fate checked his status and realized that he had acquired the one-handed sword technique, the same ability as the kidnapper. Greed explained to Fate that with this ability, he could learn secret arts and techniques as well as strike twice as fast. Fate then realized that the man could have used this technique when they were fighting, and it wouldn't have ended well for him. He questioned why Greed didn't warn him of the danger. The sword replied that it would have been terrible to interrupt his heroic moment, and Fate said that if he had known the risks, he wouldn't have done anything. Then Greed said that battles depended a lot on luck, and victory wasn't guaranteed to the stronger opponent. However, this made Fate wish for even more power so that he wouldn't have to rely on luck. At that moment, Greed reminded Fate that the next day would be his first day of work at the Hart family's house, and he was still wearing the same rags as before, reminding the boy that he needed to buy some new clothes. Meanwhile, at the tavern Fate used to frequent, the innkeeper talked to a customer. He mentioned that he had heard that Mason, Roxy's father, was defeated by a divine dragon in Gallia and that she would now take his place. But since her father had been the one keeping the knights in check, everyone was afraid because they doubted if Roxy could control the troublemaking knights like the Valeric brothers. The next day, Fate went to his first day of work wearing more appropriate clothes. He was impressed by the size of the place when he met Roxy, who was already waiting for his arrival. Later, Roxy introduced Fate to her father, taking him to his grave. She explained that he had passed away 5 days ago while fighting a divine dragon in Gallia, a continent dominated by monsters. She said that being a holy knight was a dangerous task, as one of their duties was to contain monsters like a divine dragon that hadn't left its lair for over 1,000 years, which led to her father and his entire army being annihilated. This took Fate by surprise, as he didn't know what Roxy was going through, and even though she was in mourning, she still cared about him. She told Fate that she, the new leader of the Hart family, was counting on him. They shook hands, but Fate remembered that shaking hands allowed him to read her thoughts, so he used the arrival of a houseworker to avoid the handshake. Roxy introduced Fate to the worker named Haru, the Hart family's housekeeper, and asked him to behave appropriately as a good servant of the Harts. Fate agreed to her request. Later, he enjoyed a hearty meal for the first time in 5 years, which left him quite excited, but Haru was irritated by his behavior. A week later, Fate was trimming the garden grass when 2 men appeared, asking him not to overexert himself and to take a break. They mentioned that initially they found him strange, talking to his sword and eating meat as if the world were ending. Fate explained that it was because he had gone a long time without eating any meat. His stomach growled at that moment, and the 2 men were puzzled because Fate had just had a meal. Haru then arrived and told Fate that Roxy was calling for him. Fate went to see her, not understanding why his hunger wouldn't go away even though he had eaten well. He met Roxy in the garden, and she asked if he had gotten used to the work. But he didn't respond because his head was still focused on his rumbling stomach. Roxy called him Faye, an affectionate nickname, and when Fate finally realized she was calling him, he remembered his late father, who used to call him that. Fate explained to Roxy that his father had died on a monster hunt, and she realized that they both had lost their parents, having that in common. Fate then asked the reason for the nickname, and Roxy said that now that he worked for her family, he was practically a part of it. This made Fate feel embarrassed, but suddenly, he started feeling weak and passed out. When he woke up, Fate found a note from Roxy saying that he was free from duties the next day to rest and recover. He asked Greed if she knew why he was getting hungrier, especially since he used to endure his hunger much better in the past. Greed found it odd that he was asking this only now and explained that once the gluttony tasted the souls, the hunger only worsened. The more he devoured, the stronger he would become, but that also meant he would want to eat more, and he was destined to consume souls as long as he lived. Essentially, he had to feed gluttony, or he would lose control and attack anyone in his path. Fate was horrified, feeling like he was becoming a monster. Greed warned that when his hunger was nearing its limit, it would show in his eyes. Fate looked in the mirror and saw that his eyes were red, a clear sign that he was nearing his limit. Knowing this, Fate set out to hunt monsters. Greed explained that the red eyes were a temporary power that improved the use of the gluttony ability, granting him night vision and the ability to track prey by scent. It also induced fear in weaker prey, which was why a group of goblins he found remained frozen in place, making his hunt easier. He attacked them one by one, but after defeating them, he still had red eyes. So Fate went to the hobgoblin forest to continue his hunt, growing increasingly hungry. After a while, he finally satisfied his insatiable hunger, and Greed recommended that Fate hunt monsters more often to avoid reaching his limit. Suddenly, a large creature appeared, and Fate discovered it was the Goblin King. He analyzed the creature's status, finding little difference between them except for the regeneration ability that allowed the goblin to heal. Greed explained that with it, Fate could continue fighting even when injured, which made the boy desire to acquire the ability. He approached the goblin silently for a surprise attack, but the creature survived, forcing Fate to confront it again. After another attack, Fate finally defeated the Goblin King and gained the regeneration ability, improving his status. However, after all this hard work to improve himself, Greed suggested that he offer his status to her as an offering so she could reach her first level and change form, gaining new functions. Fate became interested in enhancing his weapon, but Greed explained that to achieve that, he would need to give up everything he had gained since they met. Emphasizing her name, Greed, wasn't a coincidence. So Fate had to choose between becoming stronger on his own or sharing his strength with his sword to journey together. As Greed was his only partner, he decided to stay with her, giving up his status. Immediately, Fate felt his power fading and Greed transformed into a magical bow. To demonstrate how it worked, Greed revealed a goblin that had been watching them and asked Fate to shoot it. She explained that the arrows would appear on their own and always hit the target, regardless of where he aimed. Fate took the arrows and shot the creature, impressed with his new weapon. Then he collected the Goblin King's ears and gave them to the orphanage, knowing that the money they would receive would feed the children for a long time. A few days later, Fate was working at the Hart family's house as usual when he spotted a girl leaving. When he called out to her, he discovered it was Roxy. He apologized, explaining he didn't recognize her as she looked quite different. Since Fate had been seen, Roxy confessed that she was going incognito into the city for a secret inspection. She asked Fate to keep it a secret, especially from Haru, as she wouldn't want the head of the Hart family to see her that way. Fate understood and promised not to say anything, apologizing for delaying her. Then he started to return to his work, but Roxy stalked him, asking him to accompany her on her secret inspection as her escort. And so the two of them went to the city together. On the way, Fate accidentally called Roxy by her name, but both his sword, Greed, and Roxy warned him that if he called her by name, everyone would discover her identity. The girl then thought for a moment and asked Fate to call her Rocky. Greed commented that not much had changed, and Fate told it to shut up, but Roxy thought he was speaking to her and got upset. Fate explained that it wasn't directed at her. Roxy mentioned that she was excited to be out with him, making them both blush with embarrassment. Greed made a comment about the moment, leaving Fate irritated. He grabbed his sword in anger, but Roxy asked him not to treat his weapon that way, which of course made Greed happy that at least the Holy Knight knew how to handle a sword. Then Roxy realized she had never noticed Fate's sword before. He was afraid because someone with such a useless ability as his wouldn't have a sword. Roxy couldn't find out anything, especially the true function of his gluttony ability, to devour souls endlessly until the end of his life. Distracted by his thoughts, Fate accidentally dropped Greed, and Roxy picked it up and took a look. After seeing the sword that Fate had, she suggested that he should take better care of it and decided to take him to the Hart family's blacksmith later. So the two continued their journey with Greed still annoying Fate until they finally reached the heart of the city. They walked through the market, and Roxy noticed some grapes that looked good and decided to try them. She bought 2 grapes from the vendor and gave one to Fate. The grapes were from the Hart family's vineyards, and after tasting them, Fate commented on how sweet they were. Roxy accidentally mentioned that the grapes came from her house. The vendor overheard her comment, and to protect Roxy's secret identity, Greed suggested that they should invent a story about her having a relative working for the Hart family. The plan worked, and Roxy thanked Fate for his help. At that moment, all the people in the market became alarmed because a holy night was approaching. After Roxy's father's death, all of them, no matter how low-ranking they were, had become insufferable. The people fell silent, waiting for the holy knight to leave, but just as he was passing near Fate, his stomach started growling. The holy knight heard it and went over to Fate, forcing him to apologize several times, but it was clear that the holy knight only wanted to humiliate Fate further. So Roxy decided to intervene to stop this situation. She questioned the man, saying that Fate had already apologized, and he was surprised that an ordinary girl was speaking to a holy knight in that manner. However, when he looked at Roxy, he found her face familiar. This made everyone wonder if she was Roxy. Once again, Greed suggested a way out, telling Fate to pretend to be her boyfriend. He repeated the suggestion, and Roxy thought it was a great idea. She quickly started acting as his girlfriend, holding his arm and asking why he hadn't eaten the breakfast she made. Roxy said that if Fate didn't eat her food, she wouldn't cook for him anymore. The two of them then apologized to the holy knight and moved away from the crowd before any more problems arose. The plan worked because everyone thought that the girl couldn't possibly be Roxy, as a holy knight wouldn't know how to cook. Meanwhile, the two hid with Roxy holding Fate's arm, which activated her telepathic ability, allowing Fate to hear her nervous thoughts. Quickly, Fate pulled away and began to think that being Roxy's escort was a difficult task for him. When Fate realized it, he saw that Roxy was already far away, looking at some jewelry in the market. She noticed some rocks and asked if they were also jewelry, and the merchant explained they were raw ore, and it was impossible to know if they had gems until they were opened. He asked if Roxy wanted to test for luck, and Greed commented that her identification ability could easily find raw ore with precious stones. Fate decided to try, but Roxy seemed more interested in a blue gem. Fate observed that at that moment, she didn't even seem like a holy knight, more like an ordinary girl. The merchant then offered a discount, but Roxy politely declined, stating that the gem had no use for her. Roxy left the gem in its place and continued her secret inspection. At that moment, two people walked by talking about the mysterious fact of thousands of dead goblins. Fate had indeed defeated many goblins at an unusually high level, and people believed it was the work of a monster. Upon hearing the conversation, Roxy approached them and asked if they knew more about the story, but the men told her to ask the warriors. So Roxy asked Fate to take her somewhere where they could find out more about the case. Fate realized that her inspection was about this investigation and grew worried because he was the monster who had eliminated the goblins. As requested, Fate took her to the tavern he used to visit when he was still working at his old job. When the tavern owner saw Fate, he was quite surprised, as many believed he was no longer alive. Fate introduced Roxy using her fake name and said she was a colleague from his new job. The tavern owner was delighted to see that his old customer was still alive and even had a girlfriend. This worried Fate, as he didn't know if Roxy might be bothered by these misunderstandings. While they were having a meal, the tavern owner mentioned that a warrior had made a lot of money recently by selling goblin ears because he had found many corpses with intact ears when he went hunting. Roxy was now more convinced that it was indeed a monster, as another warrior would have taken the ears for profit. The tavern owner commented that this would negatively impact their business because any sale had to pass through goblin territory, and no one would want to risk encountering the mysterious monster on the way. This made Fate feel guilty, as he and his gluttony were responsible in a way. At that moment, another tavern customer entered and was surprised to see Fate after so long. He shared that the most common rumors circulating in the city was that the monster in question was a lich, which was a significant threat, leading the holy knights to take action against it. Greed said that in Fate's current condition, he wouldn't stand a chance against the holy knights. Fate was worried about Roxy joining the hunt and seeing him in his hungry state. At that moment, several customers entered the tavern, and one of them approached Roxy, asking her to join their table. Roxy immediately pushed the man, making him fly against the wall. This display of strength made everyone realize she must be a holy knight. She then revealed herself as Roxy, and immediately, all the men apologized for how they treated her. They even offered money, showing that they were very afraid of the holy knights. Roxy felt sorry for her people, who should be protected, but were so fearful of the holy knights. She showed the same compassionate heart her father had. Afterward, Roxy enjoyed her time with the people in the tavern, and later she took Fate to the blacksmith of her family for maintenance on Greed, leaving the sword feeling renewed. Roxy thanked Fate, saying that without his help, she wouldn't have learned anything about the monster. He then asked why she didn't know about the Holy Knight's hunt, and Roxy explained that the Vlerick family was controlling the information and not sharing anything with her. At that moment, the two of them heard a familiar voice and went in its direction, finding Hedo bothering a poor child. Memel tried to cover it up by saying that they were merely protecting the lost child, but it was clear that they were not handling the situation well. She asked Fate to step in, and he immediately took the child away from the Vlerick siblings. Roxy then questioned why nobody informed her about the hunt for the monster, and Raphael made up an excuse, saying he thought she was grieving her father's death. Roxy assured them that she was fine and asked to be informed in the future. The three Vlerick siblings left, and the child said he hated the Holy Knights, which upset Roxy. She apologized to him, but the boy didn't recognize her due to her clothes. He then explained that he got separated from his mother, and Roxy and Fate promised to help him. As they searched, Fate remembered that when he lost his father 5 years ago, he had moved to the capital and got lost, just like the child. A Holy Knight had helped him. After a long search, it was getting late for them to continue, so Roxy offered to let the child spend the night at her house, and they couldn't resume the search the next day. However, at that moment, the child found his mother. The two were happy to have helped the child, and afterward, they realized they would likely be scolded for disappearing the whole day. Roxy told them to go back to their homes, which made Fate happy to be included in her words. As expected, the two of them were reprimanded, and that night, Fate asked Greed if there was a way for him to continue hunting without being recognized by Roxy. The sword suggested a mask that distorts perception, making him look different no matter who saw him hunting. However, the mask was located near the jewelry market, so Fate brought a raw ore as a gift to Roxy to thank her for the work she had given him, where he had food every day, a home, and friends who considered him family. Roxy understood and thanked him for everything he had done for her. He explained that he would have liked to buy the blue gems she was interested in, but he didn't have enough money. Roxy thanked him for the gift and broke the ore to see if it had any gems. Obviously, it was full of precious stones, as Fate had cheated by using his identification ability to choose the best raw ore for Roxy. She said she would keep the gift with great care and offered something in return, suggesting giving a sharpening stone for his sword. Fate said he didn't need anything in return, but Greed questioned his decision and told him to take care of the sword and accept the gift. Meanwhile, the Holy Knights gathered to discuss their journey to Gallia. And so time passes, with Fate still hunting quite a lot of goblins to level up his stats, aiming to become strong enough to face the Holy Knights if necessary. Everyone still believed that a lich named Cadaver was hunting them because of the mask that prevented others from recognizing him. The next day, Fate works with sleepiness, juggling a double life, working for the Hart family during the day and hunting goblins at night. But at that moment, Roxy appears, informing him of a new mission. As before, she asks him to accompany her. After some time, they both arrive in a new land owned by the Hart family, where the vineyard they had seen being sold in the market during Roxy's previous mission is located. It's also where Roxy's mother, Aisha Hart, resides. She greets her daughter and inquires about the boy accompanying her. Roxy explains he is a family employee she hired. Fate introduces himself somewhat awkwardly, and Aisha warmly welcomes him, saying that Fate is very much welcome in their land. Suddenly, she asks him if he likes Roxy, which makes both of them quite nervous. But in reality, Aisha only wanted to know what Fate thought of her as an employer. They are relieved that the question wasn't what they initially feared. Fate responds that he likes Roxy very much and would serve her to the end of his life if given permission. His response makes Aisha happy. However, Roxy becomes so nervous that she rushes to her room, claiming to be too tired. Fate asks if he said something wrong, and Aisha explains that Roxy tends to run away when something makes her uncomfortable. Aisha goes on to say that when Roxy was a child, she used to cry a lot and was very afraid of insects. It's precisely because of these things that Aisha is surprised that Roxy became a Holy Knight. Aisha seems genuinely concerned about her daughter, as she suddenly became the head of the family after her father's sudden death. Fate reassures Aisha, stating that Roxy is an excellent Holy Knight and everyone has great faith in her. She is also doing a great job as the head of the household. In her room, Roxy looks at her belongings, including a picture of her and her father, Mason. Just like her mother, he didn't think she would become a Holy Knight, but Roxy wished to be like him, the kind of knight who laughs with people. However, she hasn't yet achieved that goal. Later, Fate works in the vineyard, helping with grape harvesting, when one of the workers offers him some juice to refresh himself. The man explains that the Hart family has personally helped cultivate the land for generations, and everyone on the property is proud of their contributions. Fate asks if Mason also collaborated with the cultivation, and the man confirms it, expressing regret for having lost him in Gallia. He mentions that Roxy used to come there every year to help with the harvest and to hunt monsters to protect the area, as it was the main season for many harvests and monsters often attacked in search of food. The man explains that they are currently dealing with kobolds coming from the valley to the north. Suddenly, Fate's stomach rumbles loudly, and the man thinks he's just getting hungry from working so much. However, Greed explains that his hunger was actually due to hunting so many goblins, and the gluttony ability was starting to crave different souls. At the end of the day, Fate finishes his work and returns to the house when he sees a girl passing by. As he approaches, Fate notices that she has red eyes, just like his when he gets hungry. He tries to analyze her abilities using Identify, but he can't see anything. The girl then says she arrived too early and leaves, explaining to Fate that she came to hunt the kobolds, but that he could stay with them. She also mentions that they will meet again, leaving Fate bewildered. He then asks Greed who she was, but his sword claims not to know the girl. Fate becomes suspicious that Greed is hiding something, as she usually has a comment about everything, and is unusually quiet. However, Greed says that not even she, in all her grandeur, has all the answers. At that moment, Roxy arrives with some grapes. Passing by the girl, Roxy notices that she seems to be from Gallia. 4,000 years ago, Gallia was a major military power, but a wave of monsters caused great destruction, decimating most of the population. Roxy remarks that although survivors exist, she has never seen a Gallian with such pure blood. Later, they decide it's time to head back home. On the way, Fate asks Roxy about the monster hunt and if she will be okay. Roxy explains that, aside from being a holy knight, she won't be alone, as the warriors working there will be accompanying her, so she is confident they will manage the task. The next day, the vineyard is completely destroyed by the kobolds. The warriors set out to confront the creatures, accompanied by Roxy and Fate. They assess the kobold pack when a much larger creature suddenly appears. Seeing a different monster, Fate begins to struggle with controlling his hunger, and Greed warns him that he is reaching his limit. Fate analyzes the creature and discovers it's called the Bearer of Lament. Greed explains it's a crowned beast, born from accumulated aggression over a long time. In other words, it's a very powerful and mighty creature. The workers become greatly concerned, but Roxy promises to protect their lands and lives as a holy knight. However, Greed tells Fate that the creature is too strong for Roxy to face. It's even beyond Fate's current abilities, but he can't allow the creature to continue destroying the Hart family's land or let Roxy get hurt. So that night, Fate goes to hunt the beast, which is surrounded by kobold warriors. He takes Greed in its bow form and shoots the kobolds with its magical arrows, firing several shots in quick succession, triggering the gluttony ability. The creature becomes enraged as Fate eliminates the kobolds rapidly. It tries to strike back, but it uses other creatures as shields to protect itself. Fate continues to eliminate as many creatures as possible to level up, but it still isn't enough to face the beast. Then he fires 2 more arrows, but the beast manages to catch them, leaving only itself and another kobold. Greed advises them to get closer so that Fate can attack with his sword. He follows this advice, but as he gets closer, the beast begins to prepare a lethal strike. Greed recognizes it as the Ruin attack, a completely lethal blow. She warns Fate to be careful, but at that moment, the other kobold manages to hit him. Immediately, Fate heals himself with the regenerative power he acquired from the Goblin King. Then the beast launches its attack, and although Fate manages to evade, he falls as if gravely wounded. But it's a ruse to make the other kobold approach carelessly. Fate attacks the creature and manages to eliminate it, leaving only the crowned beast. As he has progressed significantly, Greed tells Fate that he can now use his first-level hidden art, so Fate transfers 10% of his current stats to Greed, allowing her to evolve into a more potent weapon. The beast once again launches its deadly attack, but Fate also uses his attack, destroying the creature's strike and hitting it in return. Thus, Fate finally eliminates the crowned beast. However, only when the battle ends does he realize the damage he has caused, thinking that he may have gone too far. Suddenly, Fate feels a strange sensation, and Greed explains that he's overwhelmed because he consumed a high-quality soul for the first time. She advises him to endure it, or he'll experience something much worse than hunger. The following day, the warriors go out with Roxy for the hunt. Upon arrival, they find that someone has already defeated all the kobolds with magical arrows. At home, Roxy laments the destruction of the landscape, and Fate feels somewhat guilty. Aisha asks who could have done this, and Fate becomes worried. However, Roxy remembers the Gallian girl they saw and believes she might be responsible. There were rumors that Gallian people were stronger than holy knights, so she thinks the girl could have done it. Roxy, however, notices how calm she becomes when Fate is around. Later, Aisha asks Fate to stay by her daughter's side and provide the support she needs. She acknowledges that Fate may lack prestige, authority, and power like the holy knights, but his willingness to help Roxy whenever necessary makes him valuable. Aisha herself lacked any valuable abilities like Fate, but she still supported her husband. As she is very ill and doesn't have much time left, she worries about Roxy being alone and needs someone to support her in her place. Aisha tells Fate to think about it, even if he can't respond immediately. Afterward, they leave to return home, and on the way, Fate wonders if he truly deserves to be by Roxy's side, as he has been lying to everyone and concealing the true power of his gluttony ability. Later, Fate goes hunting goblins as usual, but those creatures are no longer enough to satisfy his hunger. There are no stronger monsters nearby. To hide his red eye, Fate wears an eye patch and goes to the tavern he frequents. There, he contemplates that he doesn't deserve to be with Roxy. A customer arrives and informs him that Hado was joining Cadaver's hunt to avoid going with the other Holy Knights to Gallia. Fate finds it odd that they are already planning a new expedition to Gallia, given that Mason recently lost his life there. The next day, after all the Holy Knights are assigned to the Gallia expedition, Roxy talks to her father, asking him to take care of her. Fate shows up and asks her not to go, as there is a high chance she might not return. However, Roxy has already decided to fulfill her duty as a Holy Knight. Unbeknownst to her, the expedition to Gallia was orchestrated by the Vlerick brothers and the other Holy Knights, as the Hart family had become a significant inconvenience to them. They planned to eliminate Roxy in Gallia. However, while the Holy Knights were responsible for carrying out the plan, Raphael and Memel would go to Tenburn, where immortality research was taking place, and Hado was tasked with eliminating Cadaver. At night, Fate goes out to hunt. He realizes he can't stop the Gallia expedition or Roxy from participating in it, but he also can't allow the Holy Knights to treat people poorly and cause so much suffering. Hado and other hunters appear, intending to stop Cadaver. They prepare for a fight, with Fate on the verge of his hunger limit.